I think the first time I ever heard the name Marilyn Manson was after the Columbine massacre. In the face of an unprecedented evil, the media attached his face. To my preteen mind, I agreed. Yeah, he looks evil, so that must mean he contributed to this evil act. But as time would prove, you can't always judge a book by its cover. Not always. In time, I would learn more about this lucid, measured, yet freaky looking dude. When attacked by the conservative media, he was so composed, leaving his critics frazzled to find something incriminating to prove their point. Manson almost lost his career for something he was not responsible for. The two school shooters knew of Manson and his work, but were not big fans. Their musical tastes ranged from the likes of Rammstein and KMFDM to Chemical Brothers, Orbital, and Lorena McKennitt. People wanted a scapegoat to blame for this tragedy. They wanted a reason behind the madness. So why not point at madness incarnate? It would be a few more years before I got into the metal culture. I was just a Christian kid back then. In seeing him being labeled guilty until proven innocent, and then emerging to actually being innocent, highlighted the lesson that it's not okay to judge someone just because of how they look. He was like South Park for me. The shackles of closed-mindedness were being loosened by a shocking visual display, and later a musical one, even though I was just a small admirer of his music. Now this was in 1999. It's 2021, and his legend is now being scrutinized not because of hearsay, ignorance, and bigotry, but because there's actual evidence behind him being evil. In fact, Manson himself has provided the evidence throughout the years. Maybe you're like me in that you saw Manson being dragged through the mud by the media years ago, only to be proven innocent, which then caused you to think of any new issues people throw at him as bullcrap, because now you see him in a near perpetually innocent light. Whatever controversy, lawsuit, allegation, or even quotes from his own mouth that you heard, they just flew over your head because, for one, people are bigoted and don't understand that he wants to express himself in a countercultural way. And two, he's a shock rocker who is trying to state a message through his antics. And maybe you're just projecting. Anyway, if you're like me, you didn't really investigate the allegations until they were coming faster and more damning than ever before. The rock media talking about his abusive behaviors is totally different than the conservative media talking about nothing decades earlier. But based on the allegations, to me, he seems almost like the Bill Cosby of the metal world. A mild-mannered and charming person for the cameras, all the while successfully hiding his perversions in plain sight, with only industry insiders and friends and family of the victims knowing the full story. Marilyn Manson published his autobiography, The Long Hard Road Out of Hell, in 1998. I think it's safe to say that most Manson fans, and in my opinion, sensible people, cannot take this autobiography as complete fact. Some of the information was probably true, but I think some is fabricated. Moreover, is this the autobiography of Marilyn Manson or the autobiography of Brian Warner, which is Marilyn Manson's real name? Will the real Marilyn Manson please stand up? I tried to find an interview with Neil Strauss, Manson's co-author, to see if he had shed any light on this, but to no avail. Regardless, Manson outlines a number of jarring experiences which, if true, explain his entire shtick to perfection. Brian was a very sickly child and was frequently in and out of hospital. He apparently also had extremely long earlobes, which he would later get cut by a plastic surgeon. This tidbit will be important later. He wrote that he and his cousin would sneak into his grandfather's cellar when he wasn't there and found pictures from the early 70s of women doing sexual acts to horses and pigs. Eventually, they got even more invasive and broke into a drawer and found women's underwear and dildos. That wasn't enough for these two kids because they would later go into the cellar while their grandfather was there and saw him jerking off to a magazine while his toy trains circled around him. By the way, this is the grandfather's toy trains, not Marilyn's toy trains. Just wanted to make that clear. Bran, aka Marilyn, told his parents on the journey home. His dad said nothing, while his mother claimed that Bran's grandfather was in an accident years ago, and when they took him to the hospital and undressed him, he was wearing women's clothes underneath his, normal clothes. Bran also mentioned his molestation by a 13-year-old neighbor who would later poison his pet dog. Christianity was a sore point for him. He was taught to fear the coming apocalypse, and he was especially afraid because he did not think he would be among God's chosen people. But as time passed, and with no Armageddon to speak of, he felt duped and lashed out against Christianity. The book also outlines a number of interactions with girls and women, but none of these interactions are positive for long. He hated one of his teachers for making him fear God, but for also inspiring his wet dreams. He was friends with a girl who he skated with, but because she blew snot into his hands when they were both horsing around, he never spoke to her again. His high school sexual life consisted of him using women for sex, women using him for sex, and neither of them seeing the irony. He cheated on his bandmate girlfriend with his other bandmate. He then kicked the bandmate out of the band to try and salvage his relationship. Manson then, according to the book, plotted to kill the bandmate because she threatened to ruin the band. He made rape threats to a random girl who worked at the mall. He goes on and on about how people, but especially women, have betrayed him. Perhaps most notably a woman named Rachel, who he fell in love with, but was actually already engaged. He speaks poorly of his fellow bandmates, with the exception of Twiggy. But as you may know, Twiggy, whose real name is Jordy White, was kicked out of the band when his ex-girlfriend Jessica Adams from the band Jack Off Jill accused him of raping her. I think the best way to figure out what is real and what is fiction is by taking the underlying message from the instances in the book. Manson was exposed to sex too early and was abused sexually and emotionally. He had a disdain for people and developed a superiority complex because he saw things others didn't. He had a disdain and addiction for women. He loathed Christianity and those who peddled it. He had a message for the world. Think for yourself, and that everything has a good and dark side. Bradley Stewart's, aka Gidget Guy's, overdose and near death were certainly real, but possibly not as how Manson outlined it in the book. But apparently he and Twiggy really did smoke a dead guy's bones. And apparently he and Twiggy urinated on a deaf girl after Madonna Wayne Gacy had sex with her. No wonder he got along well with Twiggy. Putting that aside, we all know his genius, okay? It's what's gotten him so far in his career. He was far ahead of his peers in understanding the duality of mankind. And look, I hate to be that guy, but the example he set for children wasn't the best. Sure, he didn't sign up to be a role model, okay, but his attitude gave rise to what would be dubbed the spooky kid. Spooky kids were basically wannabe goths that knew nothing about goth culture. No, this isn't so bad, but it was their obnoxious, attention-seeking behavior that really got under people's skin, not just goth kids. They'd perform satanic rituals in public, carry knives, wear vampire fangs. And based on how we now perceive Manson as a dark, perverse misanthrope who wasn't loved enough and takes out the abuse he suffered onto others, I mean, the kids just seem like mini versions of him. They wanted attention just as he did, and they got it. Ultimately, can you blame Manson for these kids' existence? I think you can, to a certain degree. The truth is, Manson's performances unearthed the dark, perverse misanthrope who wasn't loved enough in others. Let's not forget that Manson once said that he felt like a teen in an adult's body. If you get the chance to read his autobiography, you'll realize that it sounds like it was written by Holden Caulfield. It's entertaining because it's so petty and juvenile. Now, having said that, one has to remember that people, and children especially, are going to exteriorize their traumas. And while I never had to see much of these types growing up, they existed and were certainly intimidating and certainly annoying. But consider comparing the likes of Marilyn Manson with someone like Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie just makes his music, makes his movies, and doesn't bother anybody, as far as we know. However, he is also a shock rocker. He has a distinct look. He also had an industrial metal vibe. And yet he is far more respected than Manson. Sure, his films garnered some criticism because of how graphic they were, but no, they're revered. Also, they're not going to be scrutinized because it's not coming from someone who has tons of allegations behind it. And this is again another reason why you cannot always judge a book by its cover. Not always. Because when White Zombie came out, I'm sure people were intimidated, just as when Manson's band came out. But as far as I know, Rob Zombie didn't inspire a bunch of kids or a bunch of people to go out into the world to get attention by being obnoxious and shocking. Rob is cool. Marilyn, on the other hand, is a completely different story. Okay, let's get into his past relationships and the allegations against him. I wanted to talk about them all, to be honest, but realistically, there's just way too many. And every time I think I found them all, nope, there's more. When Manson hit the big time, he was with Rose McGowan for 3 years and even got engaged for 2 of them. She remarked to Us magazine in 2015 that the relationship was fun. So why did they split? It was because of Manson's drug problems, not because of abuse. Prior to her relationship with Manson, McGowan had been in an abusive relationship with a man who coerced her into losing more and more weight because he wanted her to look just like magazine models. She developed an eating disorder as a result. And as you probably know, she was at the forefront of calling out Harvey Weinstein for his prolonged sexual abuse, as well as calling out her male colleagues for turning a blind eye to the culture of abuse that plagued Hollywood. Then there's the queen of burlesque, Dita Von Teese. She and Manson got together in 2001, got engaged in 2004, got married in 2005, but in 2006, Von Teese filed for divorce. She actually moved out of Manson's mansion on Christmas Eve. What was the reason behind the divorce? Again, no mention of abuse at first. But again, Manson's drug abuse was cited as the reason. Moreover, he cheated on her. In an interview with Khloe Kardashian, Von Teese said that she felt like she had to go through with the wedding because so much was riding on it. It sounds as if she had reservations about getting married to Manson, but did it anyway. Honestly, I would have to chalk that up as a mistake on her part, but I'll admit, we've all made the mistake of silencing our intuition at one point or another. In an interview with The Guardian, Von Teese also stated that Manson wanted her to quit her work so that he would support her financially. She also confessed in another interview that she would like her next relationship to be with someone who is even-tempered, with good manners, and who doesn't break all the windows in the house. Sounds like abuse to me. Manson told Von Teese that he blamed the failure of the marriage on marriage itself, not the drugs, or the temper, or the smashing of windows. Marriage was the inherent issue. Anyways, Manson cheated on Dita Von Teese with an 18-year-old Evan Rachel Wood. They were in an on-again, off-again relationship for 3 years, during which they got engaged for 7 months before calling it and their relationship off in 2010. In 2016, Wood confessed to Rolling Stone and Twitter that she was married twice by 2 different people, but one of them was a significant other. People began to speculate that it was either Manson or Jamie Bell, who she co-starred with in Green Day's music video for Wake Me Up When September Ends. More details came from Wood, which all but confirmed that it was Manson, when in 2019 she testified before the California Senate in an attempt to help get the Phoenix Act passed, which would allow the statute of limitations in domestic abuse cases to be extended. She said she was 18 years old when she met a man she looked up to and who wielded a certain charisma and power. Unbeknownst to her, this man was grooming her. He hid his drug and alcohol problems from her. He wanted her to look a particular way, otherwise, he would shame her. When she was in contact with loved ones, he grew irate, and she felt that the only way to stop his rage was to cut ties. He was a jealous man who threatened legal action as well as violence against anyone who would speak badly of his actions. He spied on her online activity and blocked her attempts to get out of what she then realized was a bad situation. When friends tried to help, she told them to leave because she was afraid of what he would do to them. Evan Rachel Wood endured emotional, verbal, and sexual abuse. She endured sleep deprivation, starvation, and death threats. When she was finally able to escape, he tried to lure her back in with threats of suicide. When she returned to de-escalate the situation, he tied her up by her hands and feet, beat her, and electrocuted her with a violet wand, a low-current, high-voltage sex toy. When she was able to escape once more after enduring more abuse and fear, her therapist identified this as Stockholm Syndrome. She would later be diagnosed to have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. As a side note, when Kobe Bryant died in January 2020, Wood took to Twitter to offer condolences to the Bryant family, but also stated that while he was a sports hero, he was also a favorite, and that, quote, all of these truths can exist simultaneously, end quote. While it may have been tone deaf to mention this, especially given how gruesome he died, and that he was never charged with the crime, you can see that she was extremely traumatized by her abuse. But now she's emboldened to call it out whenever she sees fit. However, because of the intense backlash she suffered, she deleted her Twitter account. Manson spoke to Spin magazine and recounted that on Christmas Day 2008, he called Woods 158 times. He took a razor blade and cut himself on his face and hands. His song, I Want to Kill You Like They Do in the Movies, was about his fantasies of smashing her skull in with a sledgehammer. Esme Bianco also testified for the Phoenix Act, in which she testified that her abuser groomed her over several years of quote-unquote friendship. She thought him to be intelligent, charming, and funny, and moved in with him. This man controlled what she ate, what she wore, and she had to hide from him whenever she spoke to friends and family. She was locked in the bedroom and told if and when to sleep. In addition to verbal abuse, Bianco endured physical violence disguised as acts of intimacy, but the acts were not consensual. She was bitten, cut with a knife, and whipped. Pictures of her body were posted online. The final straw was when her abuser hit the walls of the house with an axe and then chased her, still with the axe in hand. She was diagnosed with PTSD. In February 2021, Evan Rachel Wood definitively stated on Instagram that her abuser was Brian Warner, also known as Marilyn Manson. Since then, the allegations have been pouring in. Esme Bianco was also in a relationship with Marilyn Manson, but she has not named her abuser, or at least not yet. However, after Wood took to Instagram to state that her abuser was Manson, Bianco made a post congratulating the woman who had come forward and also stated, "When the time is right for me, I will have more to say about my own experience." But given what Bianco had already shared, her story and Wood's story sound eerily familiar. Since Wood's admission, Manson was dropped by CAA, his record label dropped him. California State Senator Susan Rubio, who introduced the Phoenix Act with Evan Rachel Wood, called for an FBI investigation on Manson. Manson has also been removed from appearing on 2 television series. And on February 5th, Tony Ciulo, Manson's manager of 25 years, dropped him. Since Wood's admission, and even before then, tons of women had come forward to share their cringe-inducing Marilyn Manson stories. But did you know that there are some stories that include men? Bradley Stewart, aka Gidget Gein, as well as Scott Potesky, aka Daisy Berkowitz, filed lawsuits against Manson for unpaid royalties. Stephen Byard Jr., aka Madonna Wayne Gacy, aka Pogo, also sued for unpaid wages and also remarked that Manson spent band money on Nazi artifacts and human remains. In 2001, Manson faced a felony charge of criminal sexual conduct and a misdemeanor charge of assault and battery. At a show in Detroit, Manson, wearing nothing but a G-string, approached a security guard from behind and rubbed his groin on the man's head and neck. He did a similar thing to another security guard a year earlier in Minneapolis. He went on Howard Stern in 2002 and looked more and more uncomfortable as the topic progressed. Craig Marks, who was an executive editor for Spin magazine, filed an assault charge against Manson after Manson threatened his and his family's lives. He then had his bodyguards lift Marks by the throat and threw him against a wall. Tony Ciulo, his now former manager, was said to have witnessed the event. So we've talked about Manson's past, even though I couldn't cover everything, as well as his present and the nuclear fallout that has happened since Evan Rachel Wood confirmed to fans that Manson was her abuser. But before I get to my final points, there's a bit of irony that I would like to address. Remember that Manson's autobiography, he spoke about a woman named Rachel who didn't tell him that she was engaged and that really broke him? I'm assuming that Rachel isn't the woman's actual name. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's pronounced Rachel, I don't know. But it's pretty ironic that Evan Rachel Wood's statement in February 2021 has now broken him even more. He said not to trust girls with 3 names, but apparently what he should really do is stay away from girls named Rachel or any variation of the name. So you may know that Marilyn Manson got married in October 2020 to photographer Lindsay Usich. They were together from 2012, but in 2015 they broke up, and then they eventually got back together. Given everything we've just spoken about regarding this man, I am deeply worried for her. But like I said in the beginning, the signs were already there. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Manson made a number of interesting quotes. He said, "I'm a flypaper for damaged women. Well, I think I'm still kind of a teenager. I had a girlfriend who was in pornographic films before I dated her, and she broke up with me and said that I wanted sex too often. She said, 'You're like a 14-year-old. I can't take it.' I'm all forms of crazy, which I think is one of my most charming qualities. It's not diagnosable because it involves comorbidity, which is when you have multiple disorders, so they can't figure out what it is." Manson also claimed that his mother suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Munchausen syndrome is a disorder where one tries to elicit sympathy from others by falsifying, exaggerating, or inducing an illness. Munchausen syndrome by proxy, therefore, is a disorder where a caregiver vents or mentally induces an illness into a child, disabled person, or an elderly adult. Now remember when Manson was in and out of hospital as a child and that he had surgery done to clip his earlobes? Seems to be that it was due to his mother's mental illness. Now, I'm not sure if Manson or the writer of the article made this comparison, but they likened Manson's mother's urge to control to Manson's own urge to control. Manson went on to say, quote, "What I can say is that mental illness runs in the family," end quote. Now, consider that as this interview was being conducted, Manson told the interviewer that Lindsay Usich was not coming downstairs that evening. The lyrics to "The Devil Beneath My Feet" came from a text he sent her. The specific lyrics in question are, "Don't bring your black heart to bed. When I wake up, you best be gone or you better be dead." Consider that Manson stated that he had sex a minimum of 5 times a day, every day. When the interview was over, Usich yelled, still behind a closed door, that she would say goodbye but she's in her pajamas. Manson asked her to confirm if they've had sex 5 times yet. She said it was more than 5, to which Manson said, quote, "I imagine you're probably just nursing your lady parts with a bag of ice right now." End quote. Lindsay replied, yeah, I can't even walk straight." Needless to say, I'm very worried about Lindsay Usich. It seems the worm has unfortunately claimed another victim. The Instagram account, Manson is Abusive, has archived stories of Lindsay sporting bruises all over her body, in addition to a ton of articles, interviews, stories, and lyrics further incriminating Manson. So shout out to the people running Manson is Abusive. They've done an excellent job, and they've been doing it since, I believe, 2017. But Usich Manson really seems to ride for her man, because she apparently threatened to post damning underage photos of Evan Rachel Wood in German military attire. Wood, in response, filed a police report and shared Manson's anti-Semitic sentiments via Instagram, and also one of the photos. I was watching a YouTube channel called Of Herbs and Altars, and I found that she made such an excellent point when she said that the 90s goth scene was a perfect breeding ground for Manson to enter and exploit. And she then topped that off with an even better point, which is that at the end of the day, it's okay to say no. It's okay to feel uncomfortable about something and say, no, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not okay with this. Because people feel like if you're not accepting of everything, then something's wrong with you. Nothing's wrong with you. You just have boundaries, and you need to actually enforce them. Because when you don't, people like this guy, allegedly, like this guy, will take advantage. Finally, in December 2020, Metal Hammer published a phone interview with Marilyn Manson about his life in quarantine, his latest album, We Are Chaos, and the allegations against him. The interview seemed normal until journalist Scott Rowley asked Manson about Evan and Esme's testimonies for the Phoenix Act. Manson went quiet and said that he would leave because he wanted to talk about music, not rumors. The two go back and forth on Manson's refusal to talk about anything other than his album. Rowley then wrote, "There's a noise like someone has put their hand over the mouthpiece of the phone. I think I can hear a muffled voice, then silence. I listened for a few seconds, but Marilyn Manson has gone." The fact that Manson's management called Metal Hammer to question why a heavy metal publication would ask questions about Evan Rachel Wood just goes to show that when people are too tied to the situation, people just do not care. But if it gets toxic enough, they'll dump you because it's not worth the headaches and the bad press. His own manager witnessed him throw members of the press into walls. He knew that Manson was going to cut his ex-bandmates out of their royalties. He knew the content of this guy's character and his art, if you even want to call it that at this point, because now it just reads like confessions. His manager knew everything. But now the fire's too hot, so he bounced. Everyone has bounced, except his wife and some of his fans. And it's interesting that as intelligent and calculating as Manson is, he never saw this coming. But I suppose when you haven't been held accountable for almost 30 years, it's natural to become myopic and foolhardy. the mental health issues he probably has isn't an excuse, because he's acutely aware of them and has chosen to do nothing about it. He criticized people for drug use, but abuses drugs himself. He lectures people about thinking for themselves, but he's as dogmatic as any religious fundamentalist. He has not matured, and he's admitted it. Honestly, there's nothing left to say, but that won't stop more stories and more details from reaching the news. But in reality, no one needs to try to cancel Marilyn Manson when he provided the receipts. They've been here all along. And for the die-hard Manson fans who have stopped supporting him, I salute you. For the rest of you, especially those of you who keep calling Wood an opportunist, I really hope you change your mind. Because your hero is sick, and enabling him with support is just as sick.